This is page 189, 15 through 60 models of 3, and I had asked you to use some of all these methods, okay? So I'm going to look for some of them to be done by factoring, some by square root method, some by completing the square, some by the quadratic formula, and some by graphing, okay? This first one, since it's just x squared, is a good way to use this, the square root method. So divide everything by 2, gives me x squared is equal to 45. All right, and then we take the square root of both sides. So x is going to equal plus or minus the square root of 45. Okay, now I want to simplify that. 45 is 9 times 5, and the square root of 9 is 3. So we have plus or minus 3 square root of 5. Okay, number 18, we have x squared is equal to negative 100. Once again, if it's just an x squared, it's a good idea to use the square root method. So square root of both sides, you get x equals plus or minus the square root of negative 100. Square root of negative 100 is 10, and the square root of a negative is I. So we have plus or minus 10i. So 10i and negative 10i. Number 21, 3x minus 1 quantity squared equals 12. Okay. So looking at this one, this is also a good one for the square root method because you have something squared. If not, you'd have to multiply this all out and do a lot more work to it. So we'll do this. So we'll have 3x minus 1 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 12. Okay, square root of 12 is 4 times 3. Square root of 4 is 2. So we have 2 square root of 3. Okay, and then lastly, we've got to get x by itself. So we can add the 1 over. And divide it all by 3. Okay. 24. Okay, here's number 24. Once again, square method is going to be, square root method is good. Is that an 8 or negative 8? That's negative 8. Okay, so I'll have negative 2x plus 5, gets rid of the square, plus or minus the square root of negative 8. Negative 8, 4 times 2, so b square root of 4 is 2 square root of 2. And since it's negative, it's I. And then you're going to subtract your 5 over. Actually, most times you're going to see, like this one up here, most times you're going to see this plus 1 in the beginning. So most times that's going to look like 1 plus or minus 2 square root of 3 over 3. That's how you see it most of the time. So we'll write that here too. Subtract the 5 over, so it'll be negative 5 plus or minus 2i root 2. And then lastly, divide by negative 2. So divide this. When I divide this by negative 2, that turns out to be a positive 5. And the positive becomes negative, and the negative becomes positive. So you have an answer like that. Okay, 27, 3x squared minus 2x equals 0. Okay, this would be a good one to use factoring with, because I can factor out a greatest common factor of an x. So I have 3x minus 2 left. And then I just set both of those factors equal to 0. Now, if you choose a different method with any of these, you should get the same answer at the end. So I get 0 as one answer, add the 2 over and divide by 3. Okay. So even if you choose completing the square or quadratic formula, you should get these answers at the end no matter what. Okay, x times okay. Yeah, so first thing we're going to have to do is distribute through. So we'll have 12x squared plus 11x, and I want to get it equal to 0. So I'm going to add that 2 over. Okay. This can be factored. Four times x, and that gives you 12x. I need 8 and 3, so plus 2 and plus 1 gives me 8 and 3 gives you 11. Okay, so it can be factored. You set both of those factors equal to 0. So you get x equals, subtract the 1 over and divide by 4, and subtract the 2 over and divide by 3. $33. Okay, first thing I would do is I don't like those fractions there, so I would probably multiply everything by 3. So multiplying by 3 gives me x squared. Multiplying by 3 gives me negative 1x, and 24 times 3 gives you 72. So I'm going to subtract the 72 over to the other side. And once again, this is a pretty easy one to factor then. X minus 9 and x plus 8. Set them both equal to 0. And you get x equals 9 and x equals negative 8. 36. Okay, this one here, we're going to multiply this together first. So when you multiply this through, that'd be x squared minus x plus 4x will be plus 3x minus 4. And then I want to get it equal to 0, so I have x squared. I'm going to add the 5x's over, that gives you 8x. I'm going to add this 4 over, and they cancel out. Okay, so just because I have to use all that, this would be easy to use with factoring, but I have to use all of them, so I'm going to complete the square. So what's going to complete the square here? Okay, half of 8 is 4. 4 squared is 16. So I have to do that to both sides of the equation. This factors down to be x plus 4 squared. Okay, next I'm going to get rid of the square. So I'm going to take the square root. Okay, so it's square root of both sides, plus or minus 4 here. Last thing, I'm going to add that, subtract that 4 over. So negative 4 plus 4 is 0. Negative 4 minus 4 is negative 8. So 0 and negative 8. 39. We have 2x squared plus 2x minus 1. Okay. Equals negative 1. Okay. Now, if I get this equal to 0, that will not factor. Okay, so no numbers will work for that. So I'm going to use either completing the square or the quadratic formula. You can choose which one you want. I'm going to use the quadratic formula. Negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c over 2 times a. Okay, so I want to work out the discriminant there. I have 2 squared minus 4 times 2 times 1 gives me negative 4. Okay, the square root of negative 4 is 2i, so we have negative 2 plus or minus 2i over 4. And the last step, all these numbers are divisible by 2, so I'm going to divide them all by 2. So it's negative 1 plus or minus 1i divided by 2. Okay, number 42. Okay, so for this one right here, first distribute it through. X squared minus 3x, get it equal to 0, minus 2 equals 0. So if I try and factor, be negative 2 and 1 doesn't give me the 3. Okay, so with this one, I would either use quadratic formula or completing the square. Let's use complete the square. So actually I didn't want to bring that 2 over, right? For completing the square. So half of 3 is 1.5, and 1.5 squared gives you 2.25. Okay, so this whole thing factors down to be x minus 1.5, quantity squared. This would be 4.25. Okay, next I square root both sides. X minus 1.5 equals plus or minus the square root of 4.25. Which, I don't know, is like 2.06 something or other. And x will equal 1.5 plus or minus the square root of 4.25. Okay, so that's one way you could put it. The other way, if you use the quadratic formula, okay, would give it to you in this form. Those both will give you the same problem, same answer. 3 over 2 is 1/2 there, right? And the square root of this is the same as this divided by that. Okay, so either way, either is fine. Okay, there's number 5. Take your pick which way. I'll just switch back and forth. String will work. Use the quadratic form. Negative b plus or minus the square root of a squared minus 4 times a times c. 2 times a. This would also be an option here you could use. So I have 12 plus or minus the square root of 144 minus 4 times 4 gives me negative 32. Okay, square root of 32 would be 16 times 2. So square root of 16 is 4. So I have 12 plus or minus 4i, because it's negative, square root of 2 over 8. And lastly, all these numbers out front here can be divisible by 4. So 3 plus or minus I square root of 2 over 2. Okay, so that's 45. 48. 2/3 x squared plus 1/4 x equals 3. Okay, so once again, I don't like the fraction part there, so I'm going to multiply everything by 12, because 3 and 4 are both divisible. So 12 divided by 3 is 4, times 2 gives you 8x squared. 12 divided by 4 is 3, times 1 is 3x, and 12 times 3 is 36. Okay, so yeah, I'm going to use the quadratic formula again. I'm going to get it equal to 0, because if I would use completing the square dividing by 8, 3/8 in the middle there would get kind of ugly. Okay, so we have negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c. Okay, so discriminant 3 squared minus 4 times 8 times negative 36 is 1161. Okay. It's kind of hard to simplify, but 9 does go into this. It's 9 times 129. That's kind of hard to find, but you could find it eventually. So we'd have negative 3 plus or minus this. Okay, square root of 9 would be 3. Square root of 129 over 16. And none of those numbers simplify there with 16 and 3, so we're done. 51. 2x squared minus 4x equals 1. Okay, this one might be a good idea to use the completing the square. So first thing we should do is divide everything by 2. So I'll have x squared minus 2x equals 1/2. Complete the square here. Half of negative 2 is -1. Negative 1 squared is +1. So this here will factor down to be x minus 1 squared. And this is 1.5, or 3/2. Lastly, square it. Square root it, undo the square. So x minus 1 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 1.5. And add your 1. Okay. Now, if you would do this in the quadratic formula, you would have gotten 2 plus or minus the square root of 6 over 2. Okay, so either of those answers is fine there. 54. Okay, so I'm going to get it all equal to 0, so I'm going to add the 3x over. I'm going to add that 3 over. This one's not going to work for graphing because the graph's not going to have, I can't really solve it for graphing, it's going to be imaginary. Okay, so either completing the square or the quadratic formula. I'm going to use quadratic formula. Okay, so it'd be -3 plus or minus 3 squared is 9, minus 4 times 1 times 3 is basically 9 minus 12 would be 3. Square root of -3 is pull the I out. And nothing we can simplify. Okay, 57. -3x squared plus 4x plus 4. Now, this one actually will, this is a good one for solving by graphing. So if you would graph this, you get a graph that looks something like this. Okay, so we're looking for where it's equal to 0. So right here at this point and this point, they both have y's outputs that are 0. And that is the point x equals -2/3. And right here is x equals 2. Okay, if you use completing the square or quadratic formula or other methods, or factoring even, all those methods will work to give you those two answers there. Okay, last problem, number 60. Okay, so we're going to multiply through here. It would be 3x squared minus 4x plus 6x would be plus 2x minus 8. On the other side, we have 2x squared minus 5x plus 10x, so plus 5x, and minus 25. Okay, so we have to get it equal to 0. So I'm going to bring all this stuff over here, subtract your 2x over, so it'd be x squared. Subtract your 5 over, be -3x. And add the 25. So 25 minus 8 gives you 17. And then we have it equal to 0. So here, once again, you could try whatever method you want. It is going to be imaginary, so graphing would not be a good example here because you can't find them imaginary. So I would either use completing the square. Okay, you could take half of this and square it and so forth. Or you can use, let's do that. Or you can use the quadratic formula. So I'm going to use completing the square. Okay, half of 3 is 1.5. 1.5, or -1.5 squared is 2.25. Okay, this here will x minus 1.5 squared. And -17 plus 2.25 gives you -14.75. Okay, I'm going to square root both sides. And I'm going to add that 1.5 over. I should have done this as well. Since it's a negative there, I'm going to put the I out front. Okay. Now, if you use the quadratic formula, you'll get something that looks just a little bit different. It would look like 3 plus or minus I square root of 59 over 2. Okay, so either of those answers is fine depending which method you use. Okay, so that's this homework assignment. Come ready for questions if you have any to class.